we heard of Mr. Peaks? He is here to feed you all, give you candy from his bowl. Chew, 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 until you die.
For real though, who the fuck is this? Well, to begin, his name is Mr. Peaks, which is an unexpected reference to that one uncle your parents don't invite to birthday parties anymore for some reason. Now at first, he was just the face we see when the mystery box moves, so that would imply a similar role to the classic teddy bear, which is basically acting as an interesting but not so relevant background detail. Though he's been thrown into the spotlight because Black Ops 6 has shown that this little Easter bunny is now in control of the Gobblegum machines, a position that was formerly held by the world's first poultry-aligned British god, Dr. Monty.
That's me right now. I am that duck.
What a lot of people don't know is that he actually has made appearances throughout Cold War in various side Easter eggs. So let's go over each time we see him and what exactly those appearances mean. Cold War's launch map did not give us much information about our furry friend. As I mentioned before, he's just the teddy bear replacement. We can find various spray-painted portraits around the map of him, which could imply other people have seen Mr. Peaks besides our players, but this is likely just unimportant set dressing and I wouldn't worry too much about it. After his introduction here though, we start to get some more information in... Cold War's worst map puts Mr. Peaks in a hide-and-seek game, again much like Teddy from the original Derice. Basically, once you beat him in a staring contest, you'll be teleported into a dark aether forest, and Mr. Peaks is hiding in various locations. At the end, you'll get rewarded with a random gun and free jug. Interestingly, this is the first time we see Emo Judy Hopps acting as a friend to the player. It gives us some insight into their level of power, having the ability to transport themselves and us between dimensions, which is something we never really saw from Teddy. Wrapping up Firebase Z, we need to leave the comfort of round-based zombies for the new mode. Welcome to Outbreak. Oh, sorry, wrong clip. This mode gave us a few crumbs to work with, and most importantly, it told us the name of Mr. Peaks, with the other maps just referring to him as a Dark Aether bunny or item. He's also a major player in the Entrapment quest, where he can be used as an upgrade that spawns a wave of zombies when interacted with. I don't think he's responsible for the horde that comes after you, and actually ends up clearing the way for the player in the end. The horde is actually an attempt to separate the player and Peaks, potentially by some entity inside the Dark Aether, but we'll discuss reasons for that later. Story aside for a second, this is the most entertaining side quest in Cold War. Okay, so we have to find his severed body around the map and bring him to a nightclub, where for some reason Mr. Peaks is a DJ that gives you some sick beats as you fight off a couple waves of the undead, then giving you a reward once you finish. You have to be careful here with what you're considering canon and not, because this also could just be a random fun side mode. However, I think it speaks to the childlike entity that Mr. Peaks is. So when we take it at face value, everything we've seen thus far does point to him being some sort of childish entity with a lot of power, potentially even the soul of a dead child. No, you get that off screen, we are not going there. Wrong overly complex franchise. Speaking of children, here's a note that appears to be written by one, specifically about Mr. Peaks. Now the main theory that I've heard from inside the community is that child Richtofen likely wrote this post-Tag der Toten. To further confirm this was written by Richtofen, the burnt edges of the paper would imply this letter was kept inside of the home when Weaver attempted to assassinate him, which leads to a prominent idea that's been going around is that Richtofen's son is somehow inside of Mr. Peaks. This is because of the doll's childish behavior and the fact that he was killed in that previously mentioned attack via house fire. However, I think this falls apart for me when you look closer at the note's contents, so let's go through the relevant lines. Thank you, Mr. Peaks. You keep me safe in the dark place. This is pretty straightforward, and it seems to give some evidence to the fact that Mr. Peaks is a helpful guardian. This child, presumably Richtofen, was at some point in the Dark Aether, and Mr. Peaks was always there to keep bad actors away and guide him out. Mr. Peaks likes to play hide and seek, and Mr. Peaks always tells the truth. These are clear references to both the Flytrap Easter egg from World at War and the infamous Teddy is a liar writing we can see in various OG Aether maps. I think this is the strongest form of evidence that Mr. Peaks is specifically connected to Richtofen. The Teddy is a liar line was confirmed to be about him and not Sam's bear when Dr. Monty said this.
At the orphanage, Edward told everyone his dad was a famous scientist. They scrawled, "Teddy is a liar," on the schoolyard wall.
Mr. Peaks lives in my hat. This is the last important line to note because during Tag der Toten we hear Richtofen say this.
No, I know you'll probably never really trust me, and even now, you'll be expecting me to pull some last-minute rabbit out of a hat. A big rabbit of betrayal.
This implies that in some way, everyone's favorite flamboyant mad doctor might have had a grand plan to keep that version of himself alive, which eventually led to the creation of Mr. Peaks. I actually believe this is evidence to suggest that Mr. Peaks has been around longer than previously thought, and that OG Richtofen knew about him and not created him. So with all that information, it's more than likely that Mr. Peaks has been around long before Ricky Boy had a son. So where does that leave us at the end of Cold War? Well, he's always painted in a light that helps the player. We have a note that's very clearly connected to Richtofen that thanks him for protection and has the power to manipulate reality to some extent. With all of that information, Mr. Peaks appears to be a childlike, benevolent entity that was specifically assigned to protect both Richtofen and Samantha inside of the Dark Aether. But that's not exactly all of the evidence, because while Cold War finishes up, everyone's favorite Call of Duty entry, Vanguard, gives us a lot more to work with. This game takes place before the events of Cold War, a la Borderlands the pre-sequel, and during Shinonuma's remake, we see Mr. Peaks inside of the mystery box years before the Dark Aether was opened by the Germans. Plus, there's also a side Easter egg in multiple maps where you can find parts of him scattered around and are then rewarded with drops and points. This implies that he might want you to succeed in taking down a certain god family. So what gives? Well, Vanguard's story is heavily centered around gods of the Dark Aether, with the most important and powerful being Cortifex. And one thing we learn about him is that he is not the best son or most loving father, because basically, he killed his parents for power and didn't want a son because he figured his kid would do the same. You know, generational trauma and all that. Well, unfortunately, his wife did have a child and was then memory wiped by him as punishment. It's never explicitly stated what happened to Cortifex's kid, but he's likely still out there somewhere inside of the universe since he is a Dark Aether god. Do you see where this is going? Mr. Peaks is the son of Cortifex, trapped inside of this toy to keep him from becoming powerful enough to slay his father. Well, in the most underwhelming ending to a game, Cortifex was defeated in the Vanguard story, meaning that if this theory is true, his son is still trapped inside of the body of a toy, but without the god that put him there to make sure it stays that way. So here's my final theory about the origins of Mr. Peaks and where he's going to go in Black Ops 6. This is working under the assumption that he is Cortifex's son, since I think that is most likely. It'll be very similar to what we saw with Dr. Monty. We know that our favorite British doctor would give us power-ups, perks, and gobblegums to aid in our survival for the Great War, but ultimately was just using the crew as a means to an end. His final goal was to maintain the cycle and keep himself and his world together forever. While there may not be a cycle to maintain anymore, Baby Cortifex likely does not want to be stuck inside of this bunny body forever. So when the time came, he saw an opportunity by helping Sam and Richtofen get out of the Dark Aether and stayed around to help our crew inside of Cold War, presumably because their action would end up benefiting him in some way. The biggest tip of the hat that Treyarch gave us to imply he's not as nice as previously thought is him taking the role of the Gobblegum owner from Monty. There, he's continuing to help us, eventually wanting to create a reunion between our last two connections to the original multiverse, Sam and Eddie, and use them to break out of his entrapment. And that reunion might be a lot closer than you think. Currently, Sam is trapped inside of the Dark Aether, so we'll probably see that they are in some way working together, or at least he's helping keep her safe. Then, based on the newly released ending to MWZ Zombies, we know that Liberty Falls has a connection point to the Dark Aether, with that being further confirmed and linked to Richtofen via the map's intro cutscene. It also appears that Richtofen may have been sent to another dimension inside of that same clip. This next point is going to have some major spoilers from the MWZ lore that will affect Black Ops 6 very heavily, so do be warned if you don't want to know that. So we also know that we likely won't be playing as our Requiem crew for the entire game. The ultimate goal is likely not going to be kill Richtofen. This is because they were killed in an attempt to save Sam from the Dark Aether. So as the game goes on, it will probably end up with Sam and Eddie as playable characters, and I would assume Jansen from MWZ's ending, and likely another character that's stuck in that dimension. My best guess is the woman from Terminus's brother. With all these people working to break back into the real world, and as a result, this will let Mr. Peaks out of his prison. That's pretty much all I have to say for this theory. What do you guys think? Is Mr. Peaks related to Cortifex, or maybe he is Richtofen's son? Let me know what you think down below, and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.